Everyday injustice. Too many wrongful convictions. Corruption has infected the criminal justice system, leaving too many people helpless, fighting for their lives. Instead of receiving justice, people suffer. Is that why they say justice is blind?
Today on Everyday Injustice, we have Dorsey Nunn. He is the author of What Kind of Bird Can't Fly. He was sentenced to life in prison at the age of 19 and spent 11 years behind bars. Welcome to our show, Dorsey.
Hey, thank you for having me.
So, what kind of bird can't fly?
Most of the time you would hear that often it'd be a joke, a jailbird, you know. But probably the reality is, I think that with technology being what it is, all birds can fly. So like if you see a ostrich here, it's not a native species to the United States. A penguin, a whole bunch of different birds. Actually probably then got on, United Airlines and came. So birds can fly, and I think that the statement that I'm trying to make with the title is also queuing it up for people who actually then people have said that too when we come home from prison and people are joking, which I never did find it funny. And The other reality of it is uh, I think that I probably did a little bit more with life than a lot of other people that I see in the community uh, that have never did a day in prison.
So, kind of tell us your story, at least in a nutshell. I mean, you're arrested at the age of 19, you're sentenced to life. Obviously, you didn't spend life behind bars. So, how did all that work?
Like along the way, I sort of start thinking back. Probably when I'm sitting there. Uh, while I'm in the county jail getting ready to go to trial, the first thing I started thinking about is like, are they going to kill me? If, in the event that, what's the life expectancy of a black male? Those are some things that I actually thought about. Then as we progressed a little bit further down the track, I started thinking about, why was I in jail and how did I wind up in this situation? Right? Because like at that point, I didn't have when I'm in the county jail, I wasn't barely reading, third to sixth grade level or something like that. I didn't have the language that actually can answer the question. And I started thinking back, what was my initial contacts with the police, you know, and probably the first part of the book, in the first chapter of the book, it says, innocence unavailable and guilt not required. Uh, because like when I moved in and I'm from uh, California and I'm sitting probably 30 miles south of San Francisco. And when we moved out of to from San Francisco to South San Francisco to Menlo Park, and I'm about 5 miles outside of Stanford. And we moved into the neighborhood in about 1955 or something like that. And the initial response when we came to went to kindergarten, I was still standing around the corner from where I went to kindergarten at. And the initial response to whites in the community was they 25% of them probably fled within the first 3 months, you know. Uh, and At the time that I'm sitting in prison and the time that I'm wrestling with these questions, I didn't have a frame. I didn't have a frame about white flight. I didn't have a frame about block busting. I didn't have a frame about redlining, you know, and all of those things is probably in contradiction to somebody actually getting ready to go to trial. And I thought that it was terribly unfair because like when I got to county jail, it was a significant number of black peoples in the county jail, a significant number of black people when I was in state prison. And I was asking these questions, and And then I thought, when I was thinking back, what was my initial contacts with the police? My initial contact was 7, 8, or 9, 7 or 8. The initial contact with the police was them pulling up on me and taking a bike from me that I got for Christmas because it didn't have a serial number on it. And and at first it was like, it's stolen, and it was like, my father wasn't the thief, and that was my initial contact. Probably my next contact was picking up a piece of metal from a schoolyard, and I didn't know it was a sprinkler. Me and my homeboy Nate, we was hitting rocks with it like it was a baseball bat, and we walked a couple blocks and got pulled over by the police, and then we got taken home in the backseat of the police car. The third time that I got jacked was that my father kept going from community to community because all of these houses became available, and I think that he probably couldn't afford it at certain points, and we wind up in another white neighborhood, um, you know, and we got was playing catch with my little brother David, and I climbed over the fence to retrieve a ball, and then ultimately the police took me down to the police station. And the fourth time was probably incorrigible. So that thing about, I don't know if they told you, you can be anything that you wanted to be, and they told you all the things that you could possibly be. And they told me I can be mainly when I was coming through elementary school, it was like I can be entertainers, like baseball players. I could be Willie Mays, and I could be, Harry Belafonte, which I did meet Harry Belafonte. I thought he was a real cool dude, and I liked his politics. About time I met him, he was old, I was old, But the reality of it was that everything they told me I could be, there was another set of factors that was operating, another set of individuals that was operating, and that was the police department. So what people were saying when the police was practicing something else was also identifying me as somebody else, in which I assumed that identity at a certain point, and and not only did I assume that identity, when I started looking back, what they had destroyed was probably before I ever was arrested on a crime. What they destroyed was the presumption of innocence. And I think that happened to countless Black people being arrested, because the majority of people who are getting arrested and getting convicted of crimes, they're pleading guilty. And I think that for Black people, a significant number of them don't think that they can get a fair trial, and they don't think that nobody is going to perceive them to be innocent. Not based on what the practice is in America. So it's like, those were things, and I was tried, but to the most part, I was sitting there, and it was a processing system that I thought was in play. But like I said, as I started getting politically, started learning how to read, when I went to prison, I was somewhat radicalized by people actually passing me material, teaching me how to read, and getting a different perspective, which was like, I can remember reading Eldridge Cleaver's Soul on Ice. I can remember reading, George Jackson books, Solitaire Brothers, and Blood and I. And I can remember reading Dialectical Materialism. I can remember reading Orwell, The Animal House in 1984, and I can just go through a whole series of books that I ultimately started learning how to read, and being that I went to prison and it was a limited amount of education, man, who in the hell drops out of the third or fourth grade, So that was the level in which I was reading at probably when I went to prison, And the other reality of it is, along with white flight, it also impacted all other institutions in the community, like the educational institution. And when I got to prison, I seen so many people that I knew, and the other part that those that I didn't see, I knew that fundamentally, as a Black person, I felt like they were targeting us because like we never was the largest population in the state of California. The more I got educated, I started thinking about, the disproportionate rates of stops, searches, conviction and imprisonments in relationship to peoples of African descent was outrageous, and the conversation was fully being engaged in, at least with Black people on the yard, and in the cell blocks. I got to prison at the point of less than a year from the Marin County shootout that Jonathan Jackson lost his life. A year less than when George Jackson was killed. A year less than the Attica Rebellion. Probably 4 years or thereabouts between the SLA emerging and probably before the end of my sentence, a major riot that happened in New Mexico. So I went through prison with the most violent years. And when I went to prison, I was seeing people stabbed and cut and serious degrees of violence when I got there. But to the most part, the other thing that had happened was more than just the violence. At the same time, when I was learning how to read, my world enlarged, and at the same time, I was staying in small spaces. I was staying in the prison, but in the meantime, I was thinking about like all the other things that was possibly happening, all around the world, because I started reading about it. I was one of those people that was in prison when everybody else would give away the front page. I was reading the front page and the editorial stuff. Other people's reading the sports pages. So like I didn't even have to buy a newspaper, but I was, and I think that it can account for me getting out of prison a lot sooner, because I could see the pendulum swinging back and forth politically for the state of California. So it's like, in terms of, how I was raised by a loving mother, a father who worked 2 jobs, and I got brothers and sisters, and I was raised in a community in which people went to prison and went to jail, and I was raised in a community that when we first came down, when my parents walked me to school for kindergarten, it wasn't because they was going to assume that I couldn't walk myself to school or I was going to be lost. They was walking me to school because they was also living in fear.
So, if I can ask, what were you convicted of?
Oh, you definitely can ask, I was convicted of first-degree murder under a murder robbery where I had never killed anybody. And probably the first time I thought about actually killing anybody, I thought about that stuff in prison. That wasn't like where I went to. And by the way, when you start seeing like probably the second or third day I was in prison, maybe the first day I was in prison, I seen somebody getting stabbed in the back. I started seeing stabbings, I started seeing beatings. At a certain point, you sitting there thinking about, what would you do to survive? So like at a certain point, you start having real conversations about the level of violence, and would you be willing to commit acts of violence in order to survive? At this point, I'm a great grandfather, and I've told my children that if you go to prison, you may not be looking for a fight could be looking for you. So that was my reality. But probably I probably wouldn't have got sentenced to life if I was willing to inform on other people who actually committed the murder. That was the reality. And I think that being that we was in a segregated community, that we was up under certain oppressive conditions, I think that, I was raised with the notion of not informing on other people. And the other reality of it was, as I got to prison, I didn't think that if I hadn't informed on anybody, that it changed any degree of me participating in the crime that was still illegal. So it's like I was willing to take my responsibility and I served my sentence.
And how were you able to get released after 11 years?
At the time that I was sentenced to prison, a life sentence was 7 years to life. And then as the pendulum starts swinging in a more conservative direction, people start increasing the sentence from 7 years to life to 25 years to life. And you remember I said, I think that me reading the newspaper and all the rest of it, I can remember sitting in prison saying, man, it's changing dramatically. And they're going to ultimately sentence the people to 25 years and they get more conservative. And I was saying, I need to get the hell out of here before the damn measurement change.
Wow.
And by the way, the other thing that I thought about in terms of learning how to read, at the time that I was 19, I had 2 children, and I was thinking about when I said that the measure of that life, the expectancy of a Black male, I was thinking about that when I got out, my parents would probably be dead. My relationship would be with my kids, and if I was going to have those relationships, I definitely had to learn how to read. The other thing that was interesting for me was when people were extremely politically active on the yard, having a real good conversation. That was before they put a TV in every cell. People were talking about books that they had read. And and I was one of the people who was engaging. We should get TVs in here. In retrospect, I probably should say, shit, we should leave the TVs out, because I think that the body of people that came in my era was definitely more well read, and they knew what what they were confronting in a real particular way. Then, being that I had a life sentence, when I learned how to read, it was another burning question that I thought about. If I ever escaped, who didn't have an extradition treaty with the United States? That was something that I definitely had to think about because I wasn't planning. I was like 19, 20, 21, 22, 23. I was thinking about like, damn, I got to get out of here. It wasn't a real pleasant experience.
Right. And I'm kind of wondering, I mean, as you're reading, are you kind of going through a change because you start thinking about things differently, or how did it work for you?
Hey, like people normally ask me sentences like that, and what I can tell them, and I'm probably addressing it in the book in a real particular way. It's like if you're in survival mode and trying to survive, people trying to kill you, and your circumstances is really, 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 really violent around you. What you're thinking about is survival. And they kept asking me questions when I was going to the board about questions about remorse. And I thought, like I regretted participating in that robbery where a person had lost their life in that murder before the echo left the building. I was regretting it right then, Then, but when I got into the question of remorse, because that's what I think that you're asking, did it change? It did change, but some parts of me growing, like when I went to prison, I wasn't even shaving. So it was a whole bunch of processes. I had 2 kids, and I don't think that, I thought I was having sex. I didn't know if I was making love or not, and I didn't, and I grew into a fatherhood at the same time. But the question around, did it mature me? It matured me a lot. But the other parts that I want to say is that when they used to ask me that question about remorse, it was certain things that went down that even during the course of this writing this book, and when I was writing the book, I was sitting in my great granddaughter's junior high school graduation, and I was thinking about the victim in the crime, and because I knew that when she was going to come off the stage, I was going to give her a hug. My family was going to hug her. We was going to love on her, tell her, how great she is, and, and how beautiful she is, and all the rest of it. And I was sitting there thinking, what happens to this other person who died in the liquor store that night in the commission of a crime that I participated in? Who's going to hug their kids? That question right there, that in terms of remorse, when I'm writing the book, at a certain point, I walk out the auditorium and I call my co-author and I says, damn, I think I just ran into remorse. I says, and I ran into it haphazardly, but at the point that I ran into it, it was in a loving environment as opposed to a violent environment. That's what had happened, and when you're saying maturing, there was other things that was happening when people was extracting information, not information, extracting the ability for me to read. People were dialoguing about the book. When it was read Soul on Ice, we already was circulating, had stuff circulating. Who is Eldridge Cleaver? Everybody is admiring him, but he came smudged up a little bit too because of sexism and a whole bunch of different things. And it was like, man, I read this, man, but I don't know what to do with. When I read George Jackson book, Blood in My Eye, it was already contraband, and I read it in longhand because people who were in prison, somebody got a copy, and they was copying each. People would volunteer to copy a chapter. So I was in pencil, ink, pen on legal pads. So people would copy a whole, chapter to legal pads, and so like you'd be, I didn't read it in a sequential order. Because the person who had chapter 3, the person who read chapter 4 or 5 could have read those first. So like when I'm exchanging chapter 1 or chapter 2, I could be exchanging with somebody that was a better reader at first, So it's like, and I can remember reading Malcolm X, and I can remember other people who were in prison who were much more politically astute and came to prison for actually operating as Black Panther Party members and other things, and they were the ones that was probably orchestrating and organizing political education courses on the yard. And I can remember after I learned how to read, probably one of the greatest honors that I had was actually standing up after I learned how to read, being able to read to other prisoners, and actually help them expand their political education processes. And when people would give me a book at the beginning, what they would do is give me a book, and then they would come back 2 or 3 weeks, like my friend Nate. When I walked through the prison gates a couple of days after I walked through, he said, Dorsey. And it was the best sounding word I ever heard, somebody yelling my name in a friendly way. And when he, and at the point, I was struggling with Lois L'Amour, shit kicker books and girly magazines. And he was questioning, why are you reading this garbage? You're not going to be a cowboy. What the hell? You punish yourself by looking at girly magazines? What's going on with you? So and when he started reading stuff like think Ralph Ellison, The Invisible Man. He was excited, when he read Malcolm, he was excited, and he drew me in. But when he started giving me materials, shortly thereafter, he would jump on and he would actually come back to me and say, man, what do you think about the book? What you think about this? What you think about that? And he was questioning me. And when we were sitting in the bleachers, he would have me reading to him till I learned how to read better, and by the way, I never thought that I would ever write a book. I knew somebody was going to write something about me. I thought it was going to be obituary. I thought it was going to be other stuff. They can, people generally talk nicely about you at the obituary.
What year did you end up getting paroled?
I ended up got paroled in 1981. And
And
you
so,
know,
what have you been doing for the last 40 plus years?
fighting for the full restoration of civil and human rights of incarcerated and formerly incarcerated people. I did that for the remainder of the time. It was something that I pledged to do when I was in prison. And when I was in prison, I pledged to come back to the community an asset instead of a liability. And that's the life that I have lived. In addition to that, after I learned how to read, walked out in 100 yards from the gate of San Quentin. The next 6 years, I was working at the prison law office suing the California Department of Corrections for the abuses that I seen. The other thing that I did was ultimately out of probably since I came home, I had 3 years when I was an addict, and I wasn't a good addict because I kept talking about political stuff to other addicts, and they was like, just like, man, get the hell, you one of my high. But the other reality of it was that I became an addict. One of the things that I did was build one of the largest and most active reentry center in San Mateo County called Free at Last. When people normally talk to me, sooner or later, they will talk to me and they'll start using language in which I helped them arrive at. So I was also one of the founding members on the NNOB committee that founded Critical Resistance, that taught you how to say stuff like the prison industrial complex that come out of a Mike Davis book. And we introduced it as public speak. In terms of what I came out here to do is that I was part of a group of peoples that actually initiated All of Us or None and started demanding the right to speak in our own voices. Because even when you had these gifted attorneys that was public defenders, in reality, the prison industrial complex came after the Gideon decision. And to the most part, while they're standing beside us in court, they're also legitimizing the process that's going on. And the process is probably 97% of the people plead guilty because they're fearful in a real degree. Not in addition to that right there, I helped initiate a campaign. And the campaign that helped initiate was the Ban the Box campaign, which got me, it helped me walk into the White House because I didn't walk through two gates, the gates going in and out of prison and the gates going in and out of the White House. And then the effectiveness of my work can be measured because 267 million people stay in the jurisdiction where I done banned the box. In addition to that right there, I also founded an organization called All of Us or None. I got 30 chapters spread out across the United States. In addition to that, I co-founded an organization called the Formerly Incarcerated and Convicted People and Family Movement. And when we passed voting rights in Florida, we organized 1,000 people, and within a 2-hour period, we took it to Florida, and within a 2-hour period, we knocked on text message and email 87,000 people. And 1,000 of us came back, and when everybody was gonna be looking for who won the election, we was only thinking about who won, did we expand our rights. In addition to that, I helped pass Proposition 17 in the state of California that got people the right to vote while they're on parole. I also helped push out and got, as a result of AB 109, got another 80,000 people incarcerated in the county jail the rights to vote. And I think that they've been exponentially expanded in terms of both of those groups of people. In addition to, the formerly incarcerated and convicted people and family movement, we generally move 1,000 people around every other year, and actually hold a national conference where people are actually putting in real work and we meeting. I think that we are part of a sleeping giant that people don't necessarily see. Because like everything that I just told you, who you think probably re-enfranchised more people in the United States than formerly incarcerated people have? Because the campaign that was led in Florida It was led by Desmond Meads, and he's a formerly incarcerated person. The people that pushed that stuff out in California, we were formerly incarcerated people getting into that. And you asked me what I was doing since I've been home. In the last 20 years, I became the executive director of a public interest law office, and I have 4 attorneys, and all the way up until last Friday, when I was transitioning out the organization, because I'm doing a transition for the book. So I think that I want to challenge a narrative that's been so potent. It still don't allow members of the United States to actually think and actually think that we're still practicing slavery when it comes to holding slaves inside of state institutions. How it appears in California is Amendment 1, Section 6. How it appears in the United States Constitution is the 13th Amendment that codify in law the practice of slavery as involuntary servitude. And I want to challenge that thing, because I don't think that a country that was predicated on the stolen labor of enslaved people should necessarily be able to practice that stuff without guilt, without, I think it's unethical, immoral, and a whole bunch of other stuff. So in addition to everything else, most of the time I'm talking to people when I was in prison, they just see a prisoner. What they don't see is that I was also enslaved. And I think that I need to point out, I think that I was enslaved. I never made more than 32 cents an hour the whole period of time of 11 years. My kids went hungry. The money that was denied me couldn't necessarily be shared in my community or anything else. So, and by the way, people that's in the formerly incarcerated convicted people's movement, the year that Desmond had his victorious his victory in reenfranchising people in Florida that had been nobody thought about it until it was the year 2000 when Gore versus Bush. Then suddenly it'd be like, oh, if these other people that weren't disenfranchised with felonies, Bush might have not have won. Then it took years later before a formerly incarcerated leader came along and actually changed it. But it was 2 other things that was changed that year. Norris Hennessy in the state of Louisiana, they was practicing Napoleonic law, and what they did was you only had to be convicted of by 10 people. And what he did was he contested the practices of old Jim Crow, not new Jim Crow, and actually meant that he was leaning on the state to actually adopt a system that actually required a unanimous jury verdict in order to sentence people for serious crimes. The other thing that happened in Colorado, what they did was took out of the Colorado Constitution and made it illegal for the practice of slavery in Colorado. And by the way, if these brothers didn't teach me how to read, I'd probably been unaware of everything I just told you.
Well, Dorsey, we're just about out of time, but I do want to ask you one more question here. What is the biggest lesson that you would convey to somebody who is currently 19 years old?
That's a serious question. And when I came home, my kids wasn't 19. And what I told them that they were worth something to me and the family. And they can be worth something for the community, depending on how they lived. And if they figured out going a different direction, they would be worth something anyway, because the state and the government will charge millions of dollars to actually incarcerate them. And I think that's the lesson that I want to tell them, I think that I served a lot of time. And by the way, when I created Free at Last, that was the drug treatment program after I was an addict, it was 3 things that we was committed to doing. 1, we was going to try to stop the crack epidemic in East Palo Alto. 2, we was going to stop the pandemic of AIDS. And 3, we was going to try to stop the violence in our community. East Palo Alto was named the murder capital of the United States a number of years ago. Last year, they didn't have a murder committed in the town, and it took us 30 years to stop that. So, like, to the most part, when I'm talking to people, sometimes they thinking about what they can do for me. The question that they probably should ask themselves is that I'm a valuable, strong Black man, and maybe I should be able to do something for y'all.
All right. Well, thank you, Dorsey, for sharing your amazing experience and journey in your life.
Hey, by the way, the thing that I want people to do is I want people to go out and actually buy a book and read the book, because I only told you a tip of what that's in the book. The other thing that I want to do is buy 2 books, because I think that I'm asking that somebody buy a book and send somebody a book in prison. 2 weeks after I went into the White House, Barack Obama told the United States that they should ban the box, and he banned it for the federal government. So at a certain point, we should send people books, and we should send them books that they care to read, because, like, I've got to convince people, what makes the democratic process important to you as incarcerated people and formerly incarcerated people, since we generally not voting for us. We're not office holders. We're not running for offices yet. So at a certain point, the group of people, when I said we demand the right to speak in their own voice, that line sooner or later is going to be roaring. And we're going to actually not only demand the right to vote, we're going to demand the right to hold office. So that's going to be the next journey that I'll be on. Well, anyway, thanks for having me. And I hope I didn't talk too fast. And I guess you must have had more questions.
We were talking to Dorsey Nunn. His book has just come out. It's called What Kind of Bird Can't Fly? And you can get it anywhere you can get books. This has been Everyday Injustice. I'm your host, David Greenwald. Join us again next time for more tales from the injustice system.
Thank you to George Powell and Norman Mousequake Barrett for the use of our opening, Everyday Injustice. You can see more of George's music at www.justiceforgeorgepowell.com.